Have you ever wondered why the top universities in the world were founded? I mean, why was Oxford, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton even started? Or did you ever wonder why Harriet Tubman risked her life to rescue the slaves? They have a common thread. Want to know what that was? That's today. Stick around.
Welcome to this edition of Living on the Edge with Chip Ingram. Chip's our Bible teacher for this daily discipleship program, motivating Christians to live like Christians. I'm Dave Drury, and we're in the middle of a new series called Jesus Skeptic, taught by our guest speaker, John Dickerson. For those who don't know, John's an award-winning investigative journalist and lead pastor at Connection Point Christian Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, before we get started, let me encourage you to try using our message notes while you listen. They contain John's outline, all the scripture he references, and much more. These notes will really help you remember what you hear, and maybe even share what you're learning. Download them by going to the Broadcasts tab at livingontheedge.org. App listeners, tap Fill in Notes. Well, here now is John with his talk, Jesus, You, and Healthcare.
We all want the best for the people we care about in the world. For our kids or grandkids, our classmates, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, we want the best for those people. I wonder, who do you think of when you think of who you love the most and you want them living free from disease? You want them living healthy. You want them living a life of prosperity, a life of well-being where they've got enough food, a life where they have freedom. Who do you think of when you think of someone you really want that for? I think of my two daughters, Zoe and Evie. Zoe and Evie are two of the best things that ever happened to me. I get to be their dad, and they're at that stage of life where they think I'm like the coolest, smartest, strongest. It's awesome. I mean, I'm just living it up. Because I guess some of you who have teenagers have told me that maybe that changes. Like, I don't know, I've got my fingers crossed that it won't, that they're still gonna think I'm the smartest person in the world when they're 16, we'll see. But Zoe and Evie, they have dolls that have dolls. They have pets, stuffed pets, that have pets. And they all have names. And they have these intricate life stories. Their bedroom is a whole village of these little imaginary creatures, and you can peek in on them doing imaginary play on the ground, and there's little conflicts to resolve and all sorts of great stories. It's a pretty peaceful world for the most part, but there is a villain. You see, Zoe and Evie have an older brother named Jack. And Jack's actually, as far as older brothers go, speaking as someone who had three older brothers, he's actually a very good older brother. He really doesn't pick on them much, and the three of them play together really well. But every once in a while, Jack, who's more into dragons, World War II aircraft, T-Rexes, every once in a while, he'll just be overcome with a creative impulse to raid the village. And he'll go in and he will wreak havoc. And usually he helps them clean up. But there was one day in particular where Zoe was just devastated. Her whole little world had been destroyed. And she ran to me and she said, "Dad, I just feel like everything is ruined." And as I was walking her down the hall to rebuild her world, my mind couldn't help but jump to the many adults I know who really relate to that, who in the last year and a half, their business or their family or their health has been completely turned upside down. Some days it feels like the world's being torn apart around us. There is a villain. There's the evil of cancer, the dragon of death, the villain of broken relationships. You know, as I helped Zoe rebuild her little world, I got thinking, man, wouldn't it be nice if it were this simple in the adult world? Just realign some stuffed animals and worldwide hunger goes away and inequality goes away and disease goes away. Here's the question we're wrestling with today. How can you be a force for good in a world that is so broken and so hurting. Because I'm guessing whether you're here as a longtime believer or a skeptic or somewhere in the middle, that you have some part of your heart that you genuinely want to help the people around you. I'm guessing you and I have in common that you don't want to see people going hungry. You don't want to see people suffering. You don't want to see people gasping for breath because of a viral disease. If I could tell you today how you can be the solution to the thing that most grieves you in the world, would you want to know how? I mean, if there's a meaningful way, not pie in the sky, but a meaningful way that you could attach your life to a powerful movement that's bigger than just you, and it actually, as a result, clothes people who are poor, feeds people who are hungry, gives health care to people who otherwise could not have it, would you want to be part of that? Well, I want to answer this question today through the words of Jesus and through the lives of some who have taken his words seriously. You see, the challenge with studying Christianity at this point in history is that today 1 out of 3 people in the world claims to be Christian, but not all of them actually read the words of Jesus and do what he says. So we're gonna look today at some heroes of history who actually read the words of Jesus and did what they said, and I wanna show you how you can do the same. Our first story is from Rochester, Minnesota. It starts in August of 1883 when an F5 tornado destroyed the entire city of Rochester, Minnesota. It was one of a series of tornadoes that came one after another, and as a result, it killed 37 people. More than 200 were injured. All their little wood homes and buildings right after the Civil War were destroyed. Businesses were lost, children were orphaned, wives became widows. Now, the city of Rochester, like most cities in the US at this time, did not have a hospital in the city. It just had a few private practice doctors. Well, within that rubble, within that debris, there was a young woman. She did not have money. She didn't even have a lot of power, but she had one thing, a willful resolve to do the words of Jesus where she lived. Her name was Mary Mose. And Mary Mose went around ministering to the injured, caring for the sick, the hurting, the homeless, finding homes for the orphans, making sure that the widows had a place to sleep. And as she did this, she had a vision. A vision that you might actually call it a God-sized vision, because she saw that the only doctors in the area, they just practiced private medicine for the rich people, essentially. They were the only people who could afford to have a doctor come to their house. And she met a young doctor there in Rochester, Minnesota, and she shared this vision with him. She said to him, if you could gather a few doctors, we could create a little hospital where poor people could come, anyone could come and get health care. And he said, well, we would need a ton of nurses. And she said, well, I'll do it. I know a number of other young women who've given their lives to follow Jesus. We will change the sheets. We will change the bandages. We will feed the ones who can't feed themselves. We will lift them to the bathroom. We will do the work if you can gather a few doctors. So the doctor agreed. And Mary Mose gathered together a number of other young followers of Jesus, and together with that doctor, they started a little clinic. That clinic grew and grew. And today, if you were to ask a non-Christian medical researcher, what is the #1 hospital in the United States? Better yet, what's the #1 hospital in the world? They would say that it's the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. You see, that doctor that Mary Mose met was named Dr. Mayo. And Mary Mose's story is one of many when it comes to healthcare in the developed world. In fact, if you were to go to the Mayo Clinic today, right in the middle of their whole campus, you would see this building behind me, which is called St. Mary's Hospital. St. Mary's a real person. It's the person we just saw. It's Mary Mose. You see, you might be thinking, I'm never gonna start a hospital. I'm just an ordinary person. Well, Mary Mose was just as ordinary. What she did is she lived out the teachings of Jesus where he placed her. And her life is proof of this, that God uses ordinary people who believe the words of Jesus when he said to feed the poor, to set the captives free, to do unto others as we would do to ourselves. God uses ordinary people who actually believe that, and they live it out, and through them, he does extraordinary good. Mary Mose is not some radical exception when it comes to the founding of hospitals. But I want you to think about this. God is not the author of evil, but he says in his word that he takes what Satan means for evil and he turns it for good. And I just want you to think about this. God can take a tornado that killed 37 people, and he can turn that into a hospital that saves hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, in the case of the Mayo Clinic, it's not just hundreds of thousands. The medical advances that it has exported out to other hospitals around the world as a model in healthcare have saved millions of lives. Well, when I was working as a journalist and was having doubts about Christianity, I was in the middle of an investigative report on healthcare there in Arizona. I was noticing that all these leading hospitals were named St. Joseph's or St. Vincent's or Baptist this or Methodist that or Mercy this or Franciscan that, and I knew those were all Christian terms. And as I researched as a journalist, I thought, why are none of these hospitals named after atheists? Why are none of them named after Islamic leaders? Why are none of them named after Buddhist leaders or Taoist leaders? Is it a coincidence that they're all named after Christian people? I mean, how did the Christians pull this off? I began looking into the founding of the best hospitals in the country and in the world. And Mary Mo's story is just one of dozens that I found. If you're to look at the other top 5 in the US, you would see Massachusetts General Hospital there in Boston. It was started by two pastors who had just graduated from what was a Bible seminary at the time called Harvard. And they had such a heart for the poor in that city that they started a hospital there. And today, Massachusetts General is one of the top 5 in the nation. Another one would be Johns Hopkins. Similar to the Mayo Clinic, many of the practices of Johns Hopkins have been exported all around the world to save lives. Where did Johns Hopkins come from? Well, it was started by a Quaker Christian who bears that same weird name, John with an S attached at the end, that's actually spelled properly, Johns Hopkins. And at the end of his life, he gave his fortune to do 3 things. He wanted a Christian hospital, a Christian university. And because this was before the Civil War and he hated slavery as a Quaker Christian, he gave the other third of his fortune to start an orphanage for young African-American children who did not have parents. These believers are like players in a great team. If you think of Jesus being like a college football coach, I know that might be a little sacrilegious, but you think of that halftime talk where the football coach is like, now go and do this. Jesus told his followers to go in the world and do a certain thing, help their neighbors, love their neighbors, and they've gone out and they've done it. And we now live at a time where if we get an infection, we just go to the doctor's office or a hospital, we just assume it's there. They weren't there 200 years ago. Who put them there? Why did they put them there? The top ones that I studied all had stories like St. Mary Mose. They're believers in Jesus who did what their coach or their leader said to do. Here's one example of how Jesus put it in Matthew 5. He said this, "You are the light of the world if you call yourself one of my followers. Like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden." He continues and he says this, "No one lights a lamp and then hides it under a basket or a bushel. Instead, they set it up on a table so that it can give light to everyone in the house." And then Jesus says this to any follower of his who takes him seriously. He says, "In the same way, let your good deeds shine." True followers of Jesus are to affect our neighbors in such a way that the people around us see something in such a way that it gives praise to our Father in heaven. Now, there's two groups of people I want to address in this moment. The first is those of you who aren't yet a believer, or maybe you've been raised in a Christian home, and you're kind of doubting, and you're deciding for yourself, what am I going to believe? The first challenge I want to give to that group is this. I want to encourage you to look for the people who actually do what Jesus said. I know in my life, I had some people who were called Christians, but as I read the words of Jesus for myself, I realized that's not actually a follower of Jesus. They're not doing what he said. And when you find these people who've done these terrible things and they claim to be a Christian, you'll find they're not actually doing what Jesus said. It's called cultural Christianity. They've claimed the label, but they have not followed the leader. And I would encourage you, if you're a doubter or a skeptic, that if you will get yourself around the people who take Jesus' words seriously, you'll see something that you won't find anywhere else in the world. Now, to the believers, I want to give the same challenge from the other perspective, and that's this. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, do the people who live in your home, do the people who work in your office, do your classmates, teammates, relatives see any of this in you? Do they see some good deeds that you're not doing them to earn God's favor, but you're overflowing, the love of God is overflowing from you to your neighbors? You don't have to be perfect, but it becomes, we're all known by our actions. Even a child is known by their actions. Do the people around you have this sense of, wow, if that's what followers of Jesus are like, I'm interested? Well, after I learned the impact of followers of Jesus on the top 10 hospitals, and these are all documented in my book, Jesus Skeptic, I then looked into who are the leading anti-slavery voices who ended open and legalized slavery, both in England and the US, because it was the British Empire that then spread the end of slavery to much of the world, and the US as well, though the US was late in the game, sadly. But before that, slavery was a global norm on every continent. So who are the people who ended it? People like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman. And when I read their writings for myself, or in Harriet Tubman's case, she didn't get an education, but many of her words are written down, I found that they were also followers of Jesus. And not in an incidental manner, but in a motivating manner. One of them, Elijah Lovejoy, he was a pastor and he was a newspaper man, and he became a martyr. He was the first casualty of the Civil War. Before shots were fired in war, he was using his printing presses to say that slavery was evil, that it flew in the face of God's nature, and it so inflamed people who were for slavery that they burned down his printing shop and they shot him with a shotgun. I mean, people who gave their lives to end slavery, who according to their own writings, when I sat down to read them, said, I'm doing this because I believe in a God who made all people in his image. Today, we take for granted that even a 6-year-old knows what an immune system is. 300 years ago, people didn't know what that was. There's a whole field of medical research called immunology, and it's because of immunology that we can now not only treat disease, but we can prevent a lot of diseases. It's why we don't fear polio or a number of other diseases that used to wipe people out because of immunology. Who's the father of immunology? Edward Jenner, a devout Christian. He's credited by medical researchers as saving more lives than anyone else in human history. And I found the same to be true with the founding of the top universities. Because so much that we take for granted about our modern world is the result of the engineers who are trained at the leading universities. Where did they come from? And it's not guesswork, it's not opinion, it's just good old boring research. You can find the founding charter and the original crest of every university. And here's what I found of the top 10: Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Not 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. Were started by Christians for the purpose of teaching the Bible. And then over the years, they added additional curriculum.
You've been listening to the first part of our guest teacher John Dickerson's message, Jesus, You, and Healthcare, from his series, Jesus Skeptic. Chip and John will join us here in studio with some additional thoughts and application in just a minute. If someone were to ask you, how do you know Jesus actually lived? Or can we really trust the Bible? What would you say? In this new series, pastor and journalist John Dickerson answers those questions using evidence from multiple, reliable sources and the well-documented impact of Jesus' followers throughout history. John builds a credible case for the Christian faith. Our hope is that this series will help you confidently say, Jesus is real, the Bible is true, and I can prove it. For more information about Jesus Skeptic, go to livingontheedge.org or the Chip Ingram app, or call 888-333-6003. Well, before we go on, Chip's joined me in studio now, and Chip, you had something special you wanted to share with our listeners.
Thanks so much, Dave. Well, the mid-year match has come to a close, and I just want to pause before we go any further in today's program and say thank you. What an amazing, miraculous act of God as He continues to meet our needs in ways that blow our minds, especially in the kind of world that we're living in right now with all the pressures people have. I don't have the final number yet, but, 27 times in a row, the Lord has built a match through a small group of people, and often it's very different people each time. And then no matter what that number is, we've seen God, through faithful people like yourself, respond. Thousands of people respond with, large and small and medium-sized gifts as God leads, and great things happen. And the issue isn't the match or the number even. It's the ministry we get to do. It's loving people. It's teaching God's word. It's cultivating people into small groups. It's daily discipleships. It's helping pastors here and around the world. And it's reaching the next generation. That's why we all gave. And that's what we're trusting God to do. And I wanted to pause and say thank you and give credit to the Lord.
Well, as Chip said, we'll have all the information about our mid-year match on our website soon. So keep an eye on livingontheedge.org for the details. But we want you to know that we are celebrating every gift we received and are really excited to see how it'll impact the work God has called us to. So from all of us, thanks again for your support. Well, with that, let's hear some final thoughts on this message from Chip and John.
Thanks so much, Dave. John, thanks again for today's message. And it was so amazing to hear how God moved through the lives of these well-known figures, actually shapers of history, of science, and all the rest. John, what is it about the Christian message or the impact of Christianity you wanted to make sure that we didn't miss?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Chip. I want to make sure we don't miss the encouragement of this. I think there's a healthy sense of kind of family ownership of, wow, that's my family. I am part of the movement of people who invented modern healthcare, who launched the university system. I mean, people know how to read because of Christians. People are free from disease because of Christians. People's lifespan has been doubled, the average lifespan. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, let that encourage you today. We don't hold that in a prideful way that says we're better than others, but it is a measurable, tangible reality that people who believe what Jesus taught make the world a better place. And that's not to diminish or demean other people who believe other things, but that is a way that lifts Jesus high. And it's a way for us as followers of Jesus today to not be intimidated. There are people in our culture who don't understand this history. They haven't been taught the reality of the roots of modern healthcare or the university system, and they've actually been taught that all beliefs kind of have the same consequences for a culture. But the reality is, believing in Jesus not only sets you free as an individual, but the more people in your family and the more people you love who you can also teach to follow Jesus, the more freedom it will create for them and for the world around them. So my heart in all of this is that followers of Jesus would be encouraged, would be strengthened, would be more confident to walk full of grace and truth in a way that continues to shine the light of Jesus today.
Great challenge, John. Thanks. Hey, before we go, let me remind you of an easy way to listen to our extended teaching podcast, Hear Chip Anytime, on Amazon's Alexa Echo and Echo Dot. Just say, Alexa, open Living on the Edge, and you'll hear that day's extended teaching anytime you want. Well, join us next time as our guest teacher, John Dickerson, continues his new series, Jesus Skeptic. Until then, this is Dave Drury saying thanks for joining us for this edition of Living on the Edge.
Thanks so much for watching this video. If you'd like to watch more content like this, click and subscribe here to our channel. And by the way, if you'd like to know more about Living on the Edge, find out about more resources, maybe get on the mailing list, go to livingontheedge.org. See you next time.